Midterm Break by Seamus Heaney. I sat all morning in the college sick bay, counting bells, knelling classes to a close. At 2:00, our neighbors drove me home. In the porch, I met my father crying. He had always taken funerals in his stride, and Big Jim Evans saying it was a hard blow. The baby cooed and laughed and rocked the pram when I came in, and I was embarrassed by old men standing up to shake my hand and tell me they were sorry for my trouble. Whispers informed strangers I was the eldest, away at school, as my mother held my hand in hers and coughed out angry, tearless sighs. At 10:00, the ambulance arrived, with the corpse, stanched and bandaged by the nurses. Next morning, I went up into the room. Snowdrops and candles soothed the bedside. I saw him for the first time in 6 weeks. Paler now, wearing a poppy bruise on his left temple. He lay in the 4-foot box, as in his cot. No gaudy scars, the bumper knocked him clear. A 4-foot box, a foot for every year. The first line of the poem says that the speaker is in the sick room at his college, which already leaves the reader questioning why he's in the sick room, and it starts the poem off on an uncertain note. And then it also says that he is counting bells and at 2:00, so there's a motif of time in the first stanza, which shows his anxiousness to return home. In the second stanza of the poem, we see the dashes at the end of the lines, which shows the uncertainty of the author's feelings, and he's not used to seeing his father crying, which is another image. We see how the father is usually tough and the man of the household, yet he is crying, so we see the blow of this tragic event. In the third stanza, a contrast is introduced as the baby coos and laughs, which is positively connotated action, and the baby here represents new life, which opposes the death of the other sibling, and also introduces a sense of innocence, as the baby does not know of the tragic event that occurred. And then also the word embarrassed is stressed here because this is something new to the reader, and he doesn't know how to act in the situation. The fourth stanza begins with people around the speaker telling them that they are sorry for his trouble, and this can kind of just be seen as a formality of funerals and almost insincere, as the speaker is not comforted by their words. And then the whispers part of this stanza shows the awkwardness and the uncomfortableness that accompanies funerals, and also strangers, how the speaker does not know anyone and he feels like these people are just here because they feel like they have to be. And also the speaker here is described as the eldest, so he has the wisdom, and he's expected to care for the family and be the support system. The fifth stanza begins with the speaker holding the hand of his mother, which again reinforces his role as the comforter. And then his mother also coughs out angry, tearless sighs, so it can be inferred that the mom is angry at how her son died, or that she is out of tears because she's been so upset in the past. And then also the speaker describes his brother as a corpse and not his brother, so he never identifies the relationship they had or his name, so this just kind of detaches him from the situation, and he can be viewed as more of an observer. The sixth stanza serves as a shift as the speaker moves from a more observing point of view to a more taking action. As it says, the next morning he went up into the room, so it took him some time to go see his brother, so this shows that it's not an easy act for the brother to do. And then it also describes the room with snowdrops and candles, which is just in direct opposition to the way he died, so it just sets up the scene as very calm. In the seventh stanza, the speaker describes his brother as wearing a poppy bruise on his left temple, so it can be inferred that the way he died was violent and not an easy death. And then he says he lay in the 4-foot box in his cot, so this can, as in his cot, he still sees him as his innocent brother. It's kind of hard for him to believe that now instead of a bed he's laying in a coffin. And then finally, the last line of the poem is simply a 4-foot box, a foot for every year. And this line is separated from the rest as it is very important, but it also is very just detached. The speaker does not describe any of his feelings. He just says that his brother, who was 4 years old, was in a 4-foot box, and this just leaves the reader with a kind of just a horrified and shocked effect. For the TP cast, the title, so midterm, we kind of thought of halfway and kind of associate a term with school, so maybe halfway through school, and then break is usually seen as a vacation, time off. It definitely has a positive connotation as it is a time for like relaxation and a time to visit with family and friends. And a quick paraphrase for this poem is a boy leaves school and returns home, not for a vacation or a break, but instead due to the tragic event of his little brother's death. For the consider part, I looked at the role of the detached speaker. So the speaker simply seems to be telling the story and there's really no insight into his own feelings. So at first he says he sees his father crying in the porch. So he sees his father's reaction but does not tell of any of his. So we see the father, who's a strong man of the house, as very weak. So we can infer that the event was very tragic and significant in his life. And then we also see the brother say, with the corpse stanched and bandaged. So he's simply telling the narrative, and he describes it as a corpse, not with his brother's name. So he is very detached and does not call his brother by his name. So he has no really reaction to the grotesque image of his little brother. And then he also says, a 4-foot box, a foot for every ear. And this is the final line of the poem, which stands alone and it's stressed, but we still do not see a reaction from the speaker. So we see this very shocking statement of the death of his little brother, but no reaction and no thoughts by the speaker. So the effect of this is we see the speaker as the support system, and we also see the reality of the situation as it is not tainted by emotional responses, but simply a narrative. And for the attitude, we definitely see a detached tone, as the speaker, again, is just simply telling a narrative of the story with no emotional details from himself. But we also see a somber tone through the descriptions that he tells. So we see the imagery of his parents crying and holding his hands, the imagery of a corpse of his brother with his bruises, imagery of an ambulance, and then the coffin at the end. For the shifts in the poem, we see the first one at he had always taken funerals in his stride. So at this point, we find out why the college student is actually home and it's for a funeral. So the poem shifts from just kind of an ordinary, him coming home, the neighbors driving him home, ordinary tone to a more somber and tragic tone as the death of a loved one is presented. And then the second shift is next morning I went up into the room. So the speaker now shifts from the just observational tone to the more confrontational tone. So he confronts the tragedy and confronts his brother. So he has just previously been describing his family reaction, and this is the first time the reader actually gets insight to the speaker's feelings and experience of the tragedy. So this is kind of seen as the speaker's moment of vulnerability and weakness. And then to revisit the title, we now know that this is not a relaxing break, but instead one that is painful and tragic for the speaker. And though it is a break from school, it is not one that is wanted or desired for the speaker, as he must comfort and face the tragedy of his brother's death. The first theme we see is death, so this is obviously a first-person account on the experience of the death of a loved one, and we kind of journey with the speaker as he tells the narrative of his brother's death. And we just see from this that death is something that affects everyone. It is often unexpected and it cannot be prepared for. And then the second theme we see is the theme of mourning. So in the mother, we see that she's kind of angry, the father is crying, the neighbors and friends are comforting, and the speaker is more of the support system. So we see from this that people mourn in different ways, and we cannot predict people's reactions to tragic events. So finally, the thesis statement. In the poem Midterm Break by Seamus Heaney, the author utilizes a detached tone of the speaker to emphasize the reality of tragedy and the toll death has on loved ones. So the speaker, a college student, never gets much insight into his own feelings after the loss of his brother, but instead describes his father crying and his mother coughing out angry, tearless sighs. In this instance, the father, typically the support system of the household, is crying and seems to have hit his breaking point. This contrast between strong and weak due to tragedy serves as an example of the powerful and life-altering impact of death on loved ones.